All right. Well, good morning, everyone. We don't have any memory work today because we're starting a new study, a new book. So for our visitors, you're here for the introduction, and I don't know. Hopefully the introduction will go so well that make you sad that you're having to leave, make you want to stay for more. But definitely, when we're considering the study that we're going to begin, and this was brought up, or a decision that was made by the brethren here to go into a study of the book of Matthew. The study of Matthew is one of my favorite studies. And that just because when we're considering the special place that Matthew actually holds, with it being the first book, so in quotes, the first book of the New Testament, the book of Matthew is going to prepare us for what Christianity is all about. So this is something that was brought up in one of our previous classes, or actually I think it was in the evangelism class. The book of Matthew is still placed under the Old Testament time frame. In Galatians chapter 4, we have it being said that Christ was born of woman, but that he was born of woman, that he was born under the law. And all throughout the life of Christ, you will continuously see him being involved in Old Testament religious practices. Observance of Passover, observance of Pentecost, and all these different things, and how they are continuously going to the temple. In Matthew chapter 8, when the leper is cleansed, he tells the leper, you go and show yourself to the priest. That was in accordance with what the law of Moses said. So while at the same time you have the law of Moses being in effect, all of what's being presented, all that he is doing, all that he is teaching, is all in preparation for when the kingdom is supposed to come. So Matthew holds a special place in the New Testament setting because Matthew is to the New Testament what the book of Genesis is to the Old Testament. What does Genesis mean? All right, beginning. So Genesis being the beginning of the Old Testament, Matthew is in that same effect. It's the beginning, it's the foundation of the New Testament. It is the foundation for the study of the New Testament and the coming kingdom, and for the coming king. So Matthew builds a bridge from Malachi, and it's building a bridge. He is building a bridge all the way from that last Old Testament book all the way over to the second chapter of Acts. So when we're going through, or when you're going through and doing a study of the gospel accounts, when you get done reading Matthew, you do not then jump into the book of Mark. What you would really need to do is read Matthew and then jump over to the book of Acts. When you read Mark and you finish the book of Mark, you jump over to the book of Acts and you start reading. Same thing with Luke, John. All of those books are involved in the same process. Now, there's about a 400-year gap between the book of Malachi and the coming of John the Baptizer and Jesus the Christ being born. Roughly 400 years. And we don't have those 400 years recorded for us in the Bible, but you can read historical books, for example, the writings of Josephus, the book of Maccabees, and all those different things, so as to find what's going on during this time frame. It's during that 400-year time frame where you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees coming on the scene for the very first time. But Matthew makes the transition from the Old Testament all the way to the day of Pentecost. Now, here's the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book is to show to the Jews, and not only to the Jews, but for us today, because we're still reading this material, to show to the Jews that Jesus fulfilled the prophecies of the coming Christ that are found in the Old Testament. The coming Christ, the coming Messiah, the Savior. And to remove their misconceptions that they had concerning the nature of the kingdom. Now, we can see just how important this subject matter is because there still is a lot of misconception, there still is a lot of confusion that is centered around the nature of the kingdom. The Jews were looking for what kind of kingdom?
Physical.
All right, they're looking for a physical kingdom. What are some people still looking for today? They're still looking for a physical kingdom. But when we go through the book of Matthew, and even with our introductory material, we're going to look at verse 1, and we're going to find out that very early in the very first verse, Matthew starts attacking and doing away with that physical kingdom mentality. This is how he does it. Here's a key note, a key idea. Matthew chapter 1 and verse 1. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, how much information is packed into this one verse? Now, when we think about these characters, why would that be important? Let's start with Abraham since he comes first. All right, very good. Okay, very good. It takes them back to the promise, not the law. That is a huge point because the promise, and that's actually one of the arguments that Paul will make in the book of Galatians, that the promise came before the law. And the Jews got all lost and confused in the giving of the law to where they completely forgot about the promise. Now, what about this promise? What's it in connection with? So we're looking at this from the standpoint of physical or spiritual. Okay. This is a spiritual promise that's being made to Abraham. And that actually is finding this application to the rest of the world. Even when we look at the promise, there's even a promise being made to David as well. And we're going to look at that in just a moment. So when we're looking at this first verse, we're already learning some very important factors that we are going to have a working knowledge of some things if the book of Matthew is going to make sense. You must have a working knowledge of the Old Testament if you're going to understand what's taking place in the New Testament. There's a saying, and I'm in full agreement with it. The Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. The New Testament is the Old Testament revealed. But if you're going to be able to understand that revealing process and the things that are being shown, you're going to have some background in this. You must have knowledge of the promise that's made to Abraham. And it's clear to see that we're already starting to be able to make those connections, and so that's good. But not only do you have to know about the promise made to Abraham, you have to know about the promise that was made to David also. So let's look at these. What Matthew has just done is he has just summarized the entirety of the Old Testament. He's put it into a nutshell. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, the promise that's made to Abraham. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And actually goes on to say that he'll be a blessing unto all nations. Now here's the promise that was made to David. 2 Samuel chapter 7 and verse 12. And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. We will not fully appreciate the introduction to Matthew if we do not know and understand about these promises. Now, most of you are ahead of the curve because of our tent meeting that we had this year, and that in one of the sermons that I presented, I connected this, in which Peter actually connects this. Peter connects this promise to what takes place on the day of Pentecost. So we know that this has found its fulfillment because Peter says so. But here's what we have going on when we look at it just from the standpoint of Matthew. Here we have the promise being made to Abraham, and that of redemption. And in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. Well, blessed how? The Savior's going to come through your family. All families shall be blessed. The promise made to David. The establishment of the throne of his kingdom, and that forever. So forever, eternity, or everlasting, is more than 1,000 years. Now here's what we have happening with the book of Matthew. Matthew 1:1. He's the son of David. He's the son of Abraham. So what does he inherit? He inherits those promises, both of them. So you have the promise of redemption being found in relation to the promise of an eternal kingdom. The two go hand in hand. You cannot have redemption without the kingdom. And you cannot have the kingdom without redemption. Matthew has just put the two of them together. But yet, we live in a time frame where most religious people believe, well, we have redemption, but we don't have the kingdom yet. Then you've missed the introduction of Matthew. What is needing to be presented and what people are needing to understand. This has further importance for some other reasons. Notice this. Number one, when we're considering who it was that Matthew was written to. Matthew's being written to the Jews. I believe it's either Mark or Luke. They are actually being written specifically for Gentiles, and thus, so it's going to be Luke because he's writing to Theophilus. And it's written to Gentiles, and the book of Luke is showing the humanity of Christ. Whereas Matthew is showing his kingship. And that is going to be an important factor when you're writing to a Jewish audience, because they're looking for the king. They've been expecting this for all the time that Abraham has been on the earth and these promises have been established. We're looking for this king and his coming kingdom. So Matthew is written to a Jewish audience. The Jews misunderstood their mission throughout the Old Testament. The mission of the Jews was to draw people to God. But what they started doing instead was they started beating people back with the law of Moses and saying, listen, you just can't have any part of us. But if you go back and you read, for example, from Exodus chapter 12, through the giving of the law of Moses, you continuously find God telling Moses, the stranger, the stranger, the stranger. Well, what are the strangers doing there? That's the whole point. I'm giving you this law, and the strangers are going to come, these Gentiles, and they're going to want to be a part of you. But the Jews, they completely miss that. And you can see that very clearly by the book of Jonah. God tells Jonah, you go and preach to Nineveh. And what did Jonah do? God said go to Nineveh, and Jonah got on a ship and tried to go somewhere else. Why? Because I don't want to teach these Gentiles the truth. They had a misconception of Jesus entering into the world. You can see that in John chapter 7, verse 40 through 43, and also in chapter 6 and verse 15. Now, this misconception, these misunderstandings, they still have a blurred view of Abraham's promise. And that misconception and that blurred view is still going on today. They are missing out on the fact that these promises are, in fact, tied together. The kingdom, redemption have been tied, have been put hand in hand. And so it's in this very first verse that Matthew is destroying the premillennialist idea and view of an earthly kingdom. It was never designed to be that way. That all of these things are tied up in and founded upon these spiritual promises. So when we're looking at, for example, the Old Testament, you have the promises throughout the Old Testament, and there are hundreds of them, thousands of prophecies that are being made. These promises are all pointing towards Christ and then pointing from Christ down to Pentecost. So when we get into the New Testament book, the gospel accounts, and we're reading about the life of Christ, everything that he's involved in doing is trying to get us to this point, and that of the coming kingdom. So as we said, Matthew is going to show to us, and he's showing to his audience of his day, the spiritual nature of the kingdom. And this is how he does it. So we're going to go through a quick overview of some of the verses and a lot of the material that's going to be presented. Throughout the book of Matthew, the word king is found 19 times. Now, granted, not all of these times are in reference to Christ. Some of them are a reference to Herod, and you have other references being made of David and so on and so forth. I think once you put all of the references to Christ, the word king in reference to Christ, it maybe gets close to the 10 range, where they have connection to Jesus specifically. But in Matthew chapter 2 and verse 2, for example, we can find this to be the case. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, so see, there's one of those references that's not to Christ. Behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born? But here is a reference, King of the Jews. for we have seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. So all throughout with the birth of Christ, we find that the people were in full expectation of the kingdom. Here are these wise men, and they say very clearly, we're looking for the king of the Jews. Well, where are you getting this idea of a coming king? It's been prophesied throughout the entire Old Testament. When the wise men end up leaving Jerusalem, Herod gets the Sanhedrin together, the high priest and the religious elite of their day, and he starts questioning them. Where is this king supposed to be born? And they bring up a reference from the Old Testament, the book of Micah, and how that he's supposed to be born in Bethlehem. They were in full expectation of this coming king. So here's the word that's going to be used throughout the book of Matthew. And it's not by accident that this is going to take precedent, that this is going to be the key word, considering his audience. The word kingdom is found 54 times in the book of Matthew. 49 times it is used in the phrase the kingdom of heaven. 5 times it is used in the phrase kingdom of God. Now, when I say, or when anybody says, kingdom of heaven, what do you think we start thinking of? Anything physical? The very phrase, the very fact that you're using heaven in this terminology has connection. It shows automatically. Our brains automatically go, okay, we're not talking about something physical, we're talking about something spiritual. Because we learn further from the New Testament, Paul will say that flesh and blood are not going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. When Jesus is questioned about marriage in the resurrection, Jesus says very clearly, there's not going to be marriage in the resurrection. We're going to be like the angels. Why? Because it's spiritual. So all throughout Matthew's writings, and this by inspiration, he's been guided by the Holy Spirit to do so, by using the phrase kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, he is showing several significant points. Number one, it shows a divine origin. The kingdom that is coming in the book of Matthew is not being established by man. It has no earthly origin. Its origin, its beginning is divine. It's from heaven. It's from God. It is spiritual in nature. The very term heaven expresses that. When we start talking about heaven, we do not start thinking about physical things. It's spiritual things, it's heavenly things that are taking place. Number 3, it's also suggestive of a universal kingdom. That it has no national or geographical location. Under the Old Testament system, the kingdom was it's over there in Palestine, in Israel. Jerusalem was the headquarters. Now, where's the headquarters? Not here on earth, because it's not a physical kingdom. It's heavenly, spiritual, so the headquarters are actually in heaven. But it also indicates that this kingdom is going to be interracial. If there is no physical location, no geographical place in which it's going to be put, then who's going to be invited into it? Everybody. Which even throughout the Old Testament, you find that to be the case. Genesis chapter 12, with the very first thing that we mentioned, with the promise that's made to Abraham, your seed will be a blessing to all nations. That's all the races. Isaiah chapter 2, Micah chapter 2, when it talks about the establishment of the kingdom, who's going to flow into it? All right. It says all nations shall flow unto it, and that in Jerusalem. And yet, so even with those type of statements and those type of prophecies, the fact that the Jews could continuously look at themselves as being the only ones that are going to be in it is crazy. But when you're missing out on what the scriptures are actually telling you, what God's prophets and preachers are actually telling you, and you have a bias, you just completely ignore stuff that's being taught. So here's number 4, or where are we at? Number 5. A kingdom that comes from heaven or comes from God, then you must have a king that comes from God as well. The kingdom is of divine origin, therefore its king must be of divine origin. The mission and the purpose that we have of why the king must come from God. It is a king, or he is a king that came from God to man for God. He's on a mission. He has a purpose. And our next point is going to show us what that purpose is. He is a king that is from God to man for the purpose of God to reveal himself to man. When we think about the Son of God, Christ, coming to earth, in which this is even found in Matthew chapter 1, when you have connection, and I'm not wanting to go too far because I have a sermon that's developed on this thought, but when we're looking at the birth of Christ, and you have the mention of the prophecy from Isaiah, how that a virgin is going to bring forth a child, his name shall be called Emmanuel, which is interpreted being, what is it? God with us. That's the reason why God sent his Son, is so that God could be in the very presence of man, and that God could reveal himself to man. He revealed the rule of God. What is a king without power? God is the one that's in charge, and he revealed that. He had authority while he was here on earth. The very last chapter of the book of Matthew, before he ascends into heaven, what does he say to his apostles? Matthew 28. All right, all power, all authority has been given to me. That's what he came to show. Now, it's one thing, and here's why this is so important. Do people today, do they recognize this? All right, kind of, sort of. It's a trick question. They recognize this. When you ask them, is God in control? What would they say? Yes. But do they really believe it? No, they don't. And you can tell by the way they live. They do not follow any of the rules of the king. Guess what was going on through Israel's history? Did they say with the mouth, did they recognize God is in control? Yes. But did they believe it? No. You can tell by the way they constantly broke God's rule. Now, here's the problem with that, which is not really a problem under the Old Testament system, because God was revealing himself throughout the Old Testament. The parting of the Red Sea, the wandering in the wilderness, the parting of the Jordan River, God was constantly showing himself to the people that he was in charge. Now, do we have that kind of stuff going on today? Is God parting the Red Sea today? No. So the evidence is less for us. So what did we need to take place? We needed God to come down and show himself to us. And it's recorded right here. He showed himself and he showed his rule. He revealed the holiness of God. When you look at the life of Christ, you see the life of God, and it is full of holiness. Not any iniquity found within him. But at the same time that we have him showing the rule and the holiness of God, notice this, he also revealed the compassion of God. And that is an important factor, because how do people today look at the Old Testament? So here's how they phrase it. They think that there's a different God in the Old Testament than there is in the New Testament. What's the Old Testament God? All right, angry, vengeful, bloodthirsty, a God of war. But the same level of compassion that you have in the New Testament is also found in the Old Testament. But God sent forth his Son, and in bringing his Son to earth, we are able to read it. They saw it firsthand, and his compassion for mankind. That yes, he is just, and that he will punish people. But he also has a compassionate and merciful side. Jesus also reveals the final authority that God has. And Matthew is going to show all of this to us. And certainly when we go through our study, I'm going to spend a lot of time bringing out this point of compassion. Because even we get into the same mentality that people have of God today. That God is just, he's, I don't want to say a big bully, but he's this vengeful king, and he's sitting in heaven with his thumb over a red button just waiting for us to mess up and to send us to hell. That's not what Jesus reveals. Yes, he will punish, but he is compassionate. This idea of the compassion and the authority that's being revealed to us is going to be very important because, as we are saying, Jesus is going to show himself as an interpretation of God. He's a manifestation of God. No man had seen God at any time until the Son of God came. And so that's how he would say to his apostles in John chapter 14, when they ask of him, how can we say that we've seen the Father? And Jesus answers and says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. His attitude, his lifestyle, the way that he went about and carried himself, everything that he did was a revelation and a manifestation of God. He is the interpretation of what God is like when we stand before him in judgment. When we consider the idea of death and that we then have to await judgment, that we will have to stand before God in judgment, when we read about and we study the life of Christ as it's presented in the book of Matthew, how should we then feel about the judgment? For Jesus to say to the Jews in Matthew chapter 23, I would have gathered you together as a hen gathers her chicks. When I think about Christ in that way, and that Christ is God, that's the same mentality that God has, then what about the judgment? I can't wait for the judgment. Now, that is dependent upon how we live while we're here on this earth. Jesus says that to the Jews, I would have gathered you together, but he says, you refused me. All right, if you're going to refuse to follow the Christ and follow God, then you don't get that on the judgment. Instead, you get punishment. So we have it being shown to us as to what we're going to receive on the judgment depends on what we do. Our obedience or our refusal. Christ is also an interpretation on how to please God. This is a huge factor that needs to be pointed out today because many people have the mentality that, well, you can just do whatever you want to and God will be pleased with it. Throughout the study of Matthew, we will be shown very clearly what God is pleased with and what he is displeased with. What he likes and what he does not like, and especially in the realm of religion. So not only is God showing himself to us in the book of Matthew, but this study will also teach us what God expects from us. He's not only showing what he looks like, but he is showing what we're supposed to look like, how we're supposed to be, what he's wanting us to be like, so as to be found pleasing and to be found in the same image of his Son. Not only that, we have been presented how that man's only hope is in the kingdom. The king is coming. His kingdom is coming. When he comes with his kingdom, he's bringing redemption with him. Therefore, that's your only hope. Since this is the only hope, therefore, man must submit to the rules of the kingdom. This was a big problem throughout Old Testament Israel's history. They were constantly involved in ignoring God as their king. I mean, the very fact that you have them asking Samuel for a king so as to be like everybody else. Samuel is sad, but then what does God say to Samuel? Samuel, they've not rejected you. They've rejected me. And it's not just a situation where they rejected God, it's that they rejected God as their king. Throughout the Old Testament, they lived under a theocracy. Not a monarchy, but a theocracy. God as king. What's the problem with that? God doesn't sit on an earthly throne. God doesn't have an earthly kingdom that we can all see and that we can all view. It ends up turning into a situation where God is constantly at a distance. He's in a realm that we cannot see, that we can't hear, that we cannot even get close to. And throughout the Old Testament, and specifically in the major prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and even some of the minor prophets, you have the priests, you have the kings, you have the princes, and they are all saying about the things that they're doing that are sinful, and they know it, but they are involved in those practices because God is too far away to where he cannot see. He cannot see, he cannot hear, he doesn't know what we're involved in. God is always at a distance. Jesus came so as to bring God close, to bring him back into our realm. And this is going to be beneficial for us because we are 2,000 years removed from what we're going to be reading about. And as time goes on, as we get further and further away from that, then how do we start thinking about God? He's 2,000 years removed. When in reality, he's just as close today as he was during these events. It was a problem for Israel in the Old Testament. It's a problem for people today. Have the same issues. God's really not watching. God's really not listening. God really doesn't care about what's going on here. He created us. He started this world spinning, and then he just stepped back. Jesus came to show that God is interested, that he is invested in his creation, and so much so that he would send his son to die for his creation. So this study, it is designed to humble us. What we're studying, these are matters of life and death. If the only hope of man is in the kingdom, and that men must submit to the rules of the kingdom, these are not trivial matters that we're looking at. These are matters that are going to have eternal consequences. And so if we will go through this together, and if we will really study it, and I'm talking about not just simply what we're doing here on Sunday mornings. What is going on here at Sunday mornings is designed to whet your appetite and to have you want to dig in deeper, which we're going to be going pretty deep. We're not going to be moving fast through this study. But even with what we're going to dig into, it's going to have you want to go even further. But especially what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to apply this information. Study about it and use it. Because that's what Jesus is coming to do in this book. He is coming to show to the people that are going to follow him, this is how you're supposed to live. If you're going to be in my kingdom, this is what you got to do. If you're going to be in my mercy, be found in my compassion, if you're going to be found pleasing in the sight of God, this is what you're going to have to do. And he's going to show us very clearly the contrast of people that are not going to do what he says to do. So if we will study this, if we will apply it, and go with the recognition that we're not dealing with, trivial things, but that we are going to get at what religion is all about. The book of Matthew is going to show us what Christianity is, and at the same time what it is not. And it will show us what kind of religion that God appreciates, that he likes, and what kind of religion that God hates. Now, Paul, he will put this in a summarizing factor for us in Romans chapter 14 and verse 17. For the kingdom of God, so we're still talking about the same thing. Notice, it is not meat and drink. So even Paul is showing to his audience, look, the kingdom of God is not physical. It's not meat and drink. But, look at this, righteousness. Righteousness comes from God. Doing the right things for the right reason. And when we are found in righteousness, notice what we have coming out of that. Righteousness and peace. Once we have peace, then look at what we have. And joy in the Holy Ghost. These three working together, growing out of each other, and notice, these are what make up the kingdom of God. Righteousness is a set rule. Everybody is not able to go out and establish their own rule and their own way of righteousness. God does that. Being found in righteousness then produces peace, and thus producing joy. Why is there so much unrest that we have going on throughout our society, throughout our country, and even throughout the world? Is because people are ignoring the right ways of God. Everybody is busy trying to establish their own way. Well, here's what I think righteousness is, or here's what I think righteousness is. The book of Matthew, the entirety of the Bible is going to show us, no, here's what righteousness is. Either you're going to do it or you're not. If you will, then there's peace. If you won't, there's unrest. If you'll follow after righteousness, there'll be joy. But if you're not going to follow after unrighteousness, there's going to be sadness. There's going to be mourning. And it's this area where the kingdom is being established and what constitutes and what makes up what's inside of the kingdom. So these are the things that we're striving to reach after. So not only is it found in the writings of Matthew, but even as we move further into the New Testament, with Paul writing to the Roman church, here he is, and he's still establishing, he's still working from the same foundation. So even as we go into Paul's letters, we're not going to lose sight of what's at the beginning, and that of the kingdom. So the theme of the entirety of the book, and this is what we're going to do our very best to set out as our thesis or our theory, and thus going through the book and finding evidences to prove this point. We are going to teach and establish Christ as the king and the establishment of his kingdom during the time frame and during the book of Matthew. But not only as Christ as being this king and establishing and the establishment of his kingdom, we're also going to establish him as the redeeming king, and that his kingdom is one of a redeeming principle. Now, just to notice some Old Testament prophecies that are speaking of this coming kingdom and showing forth of this coming kingdom. Psalm 110 and verse 1. This speaking to David, but we realize that this is not actually talking about David. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of thy strength out of Zion. Rule thou in the midst of thine enemies. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power. In the beauties of holiness, from the womb of the morning, thou hast the dew of thy youth. The Lord hath sworn, and will not repent, that thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So even in this passage, we have prophecy being made of a king sitting on his throne. But then you notice here in verse 4, we also have in the same prophecy the mentioning of a priest. And that he would be a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Now, that is important. Well, let me just ask, why is that important? All right, it's in Hebrews. But why is it in Hebrews? Let's just break it down. A priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Where do priests come from? All right, God. All right, the tribe of Levi. Melchizedek is not of the tribe of Levi. So even in the book of Psalms, he is establishing early. He's going to be a priest, but he's not going to be a priest after the law. And even the Hebrew writer is going to say that. What tribe did Jesus come from? Judah. There is no mention in the law of Moses of any priest coming out of the tribe of Judah. All of this is showing something is coming and something is changing. All throughout this time frame, the priests come from Levi, the high priest comes from the seed of Aaron. Now we're going to have a high priest coming after the order of Melchizedek, coming from the tribe of Judah, and he's not a child of Aaron, he's a child of David. So what about this king? He's not coming for the purpose of setting up a throne, physical throne, and ruling physically. He is coming as a king priest. And the priests were in the business of reconciliation and that of redemption. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. For unto us a child is born, unto us is given, or unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom to order it, and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. David was being promised about it. Isaiah, in trying to encourage the northern kingdom to stop being rebellious and to follow after the ways of God, was trying to do that. He was trying to impress upon them, listen, you do not need to depart from what God has said, because if you do, then you're going to miss out on this coming government, that it would be upon his shoulders, and that it would be a government that would last forever. And when we get into the book of Matthew, his lineage is going to establish for us the credentials that Jesus is this king of the Psalms, of Isaiah, Jeremiah for that matter. Thus, that's the reason why you have the family tree being mentioned in the first chapter. That's why you have the lineages or the genealogies that are mentioned throughout the Old Testament. They're not there just to take up space. They are there for a reason, because they're being told throughout the Old Testament, this is the family that he's going to come through. Okay, guess what we need to do then? We need to keep track of all of our families. The Old Testament does that for us. Matthew is going to give us the royal lineage, that from David through Solomon, while Luke gives us the lineage that comes through Nathan, Mary's side of the family. That's done for two reasons. It gives the royal line, but at the same time giving this fleshly line, and it's showing that yes, he is in fact a king, but he has this pauper or public side, if you will, that puts him on the same level with everybody else. So this is done so as to be able to show that he's royal in some form or fashion through both lines of the family. And it's going to impress on the minds of this day, and also on the minds of people today. They had a need for a king, but they had a need for a different kind of king than what they had had throughout all this history. And if you think about it, And people should think about that today. What good would a physical king do? They had physical kings. Saul, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, Jeroboam, go on down the line. How did that work out for them? Usually didn't go too well, and especially in the northern kingdom. Well, I tell you what, we've had all these troubles with the kings in the past, but let's give it one more try and let's see if it turns out any different. Isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a different result? That's exactly what the Jews during this time frame, that's what people today are trying to do. Well, all we need is for Jesus to come and sit on an earthly king or earthly throne. That didn't work in the past, and that's not what we're needing. We need a king, but not earthly. We need a king that's spiritual. We need a king that has a connection to the priesthood, and a king that can actually come about with his authority and redeem from sin. But not only do we have the royal lineage and the royal bloodline being shown, but we also have being found inside of the family tree what we mentioned earlier about a universal kingdom that is open for everybody. Because inside of the family tree of Jesus, you're going to find some characters that more than likely you weren't expecting to find there. And that's done on purpose. But we'll look at that next time. All right. Thoughts, questions on the introduction? All right. And we'll take a short little break, switch some things over, and we'll get into our worship assembly.